Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I guess this is the first of an interview series um, that I've been meaning to put together um, for a while now. And certainly within this time, I've been really interested in reaching out to people and people in the artistic community, and because I feel like we're being pretty heavily impacted during this time, um, and kind of facing, in some senses, new challenges, and in other senses, something we've always been aware of, just the idea of improvising um, within our own just line of work, you know. So I really appreciate you joining me, and I'm uh, very excited to just embark on this kind of in an improvisational manner. So I guess I really want to start with something that I think we had shared a call uh, a few weeks or maybe a month ago now, um,
Mm.
and something we had kind of come across as common was the idea of, I guess, just heritage and how that relates to
Yeah,
our work and what that even means to us. So I read on your website that you're raised in Switzerland with
yeah, exactly.
with Czech roots and Pashtun descent. So, um, having been in the middle of my own kind of coming to terms and coming to
Yes,
awareness
you.
process. Oh, uh, what what what
Mm.
was it like growing up and just yeah, growing up in Switzerland with these identities, and how did they arise?
Yeah, well, it's a long story. I try to make it to the point. It was actually really difficult. It was very, very difficult. Um, so, because first of all, my mother she met my father in Russia. That's where I was conceived. And then but he had to go back to Afghanistan pretty shortly after, and my mother went back to Czech Republic. She gave birth there to me, and then right after, actually, she left for Switzerland to work as an au pair, because back in Russia she was a student. She was only 19. And so, yeah, so she went to Switzerland. I was with my grandmother alone for 3 years in Czech Republic, and then I came after her. So that was already, kind of the first incision by, being torn apart, like torn away from one culture to the next from a very young age. And of course, while growing up, I always felt there was something missing. Of course, one thing was, okay, being kind of Czech, but growing up in Switzerland, which was a very xenophobic. It was actually a very racist environment as well, where I grew up. And at the same time, also knowing that, oh, there's a whole other part of me that I never really got to know from a very young age. I knew that my father was in Afghanistan. Well, actually, I knew that he was from Afghanistan. I knew that he had to go back there. But my mother, um, she was never completely honest to me either. So she kept on telling me that he was actually dead, that he fell in the war, and so on and so on, which turned out not to be true at all. But I get to that later. So that was the first thing, growing up in this very hostile environment, almost battling my own demons, because I knew I didn't know, but I felt. I mean, of course, as a little child, you don't really understand what's going on, but you feel it. You feel it. There's a lot of emotions, but you don't really understand them. So growing up in this environment, it was very tough, because I always felt that I don't belong there for various reasons, and I could never, even as a little child, never really integrate either. it simply it wasn't possible. It was not possible being basically thrown around all the time. And for me, it was like, okay, especially later, out of this feeling, when I could also articulate it and also intellectualize it, the basic question has always been and still is, where do I actually belong? Where are my roots? What are my roots actually? And it has been really a very, very long journey, which for me, especially becoming a teenager and growing up, it has become something like, oh yeah, I want to find my roots. I want to find the place where I feel home. I want to find somewhere where I belong.
Yeah.
And that has proven to be almost impossible because, growing up in Switzerland, I was never part of this society because the environment never accepted me. I felt myself, okay, I'm not part of it, but it's also the environment that never accepted me. So basically in Switzerland, or in generally speaking in Central Europe, I'm always seen as brown, actually. And so that has never really been possible. But also at some point, I was like, okay, let's maybe get more in touch with my Czech roots, because at least, I speak the language. And I did grow up with a Czech mother in the end, right? And I still have family in Czech Republic, which is actually my grandmother and my uncle. But also that has, it has proven me that also when it comes to that side of me, also there I'm not being accepted, As an example, when I was, a very stupid example, when I went to concerts, because it's also very rare actually, for whatever reason, to find Czech people living outside of Czech Republic. It's rather rare. I don't know why. But when I saw, like in a concert program, oh, there's a Czech musician, so I would go after the concert to this person, be like in Czech, oh, hello, blah, blah, blah. And this person they were always very happy to meet another Czech person outside of the country, right? But it happened every time. It happened the same thing. Like after 5 minutes of conversation, they were like, oh, but you have an accent, and then immediately kind of pulling away from me and just, okay, I have to go, goodbye. And I never heard again from these people. Mm-hmm. And also going back to Czech Republic, there was the same thing, I mean, I don't feel any acceptance there at all, because also, I mean, the way how I look, for instance, I don't fit in. The way how I speak, I mean, I do speak the language fluently, but I do have an accent of some sort. So there has never been any connection. So basically, being half Czech, but not being accepted at all by the people of the country, growing up in Switzerland, never being accepted there either. But then at some point, I was like, okay, I started to get in touch also more with my Afghan roots, also getting to know people from that area as well. And that's also very interesting, because when I meet Afghans, but also Iranians, for instance, as well, or any kind of Pashtuns, they always accept me right away. I'm always their brother, but internally it does not make me feel completely at ease, because I don't even speak the language,
Yeah.
So there, it's always kind of this sort of battle of fighting for belonging, basically, which has it has never found an end.
Yeah. My question would then be, because of this almost limitless nature of finding and searching for identity, where did music come into your life? I remember, I mean, you had said just a minute ago the idea of going to a concert and searching for Czech musicians, or was it something that you were surrounded by, and then was it something that you began to seek early on, or I'm just curious of how it found its way into your life?
The Czech part, you mean, basically, or yeah?
Or
well,
Czech, or just music in general?
or just music in general. Yeah, that's also, I mean, music is also a very interesting story, actually, because I grew up in an environment which had absolutely nothing to do with music, absolutely nothing. And I had, as I mentioned before, because of these conflicts, a very, very difficult upbringing. And I think one of the reasons why something, I was really looking for something, searching for something that I see myself in, because obviously my environment didn't give me anything from it, absolutely nothing. And it was actually quite interesting because I discovered music in that sense relatively late. I was 13, 14 when I discovered the instrument that I play, the viola da gamba, which of course has not been nothing common back then, neither today, but purely by accident, I discovered this instrument and I was like, oh, wow, I want to play this. I want to become a professional musician. I'm going to do everything in order to achieve that. And of course, you know, coming from a family that has absolutely nothing to do with music at all, it was very challenging, but I have to say I was very, very, very lucky that I got to meet people who really supported me on this journey from a very young age. Like I met this luthier who just lent me an instrument for free for a year, for instance. You know, oh, here you can just have it. You know, you really want to do it here, just have it. My very first teacher, she even was a private teacher, because this instrument you don't learn at a music school in Switzerland. At least, well, now it's a little bit different, but back then it was not the case. So I found this musician, Brigitte, and she just taught me for a year completely for free, you know. So I was really, really lucky to meet these people who really gave me the opportunity to embark on this journey, actually, that really helped me also to get out of this very hostile environment that I was in. So, yeah.
Yeah. And when you met that first teacher, was that in Switzerland?
It was in Switzerland, yeah. I was 13, 14. And the thing was also, you know, growing up in this sort of environment, I don't know how much what you know about Switzerland, especially the part where I grew up, which is like the Swiss German part, which is very, very conservative, very xenophobic as well. And so the thing is, okay, you know, by the age of 13, you do an apprenticeship and then higher education at all. So what happened was I finished school when I was 13, almost 14. I started to play this instrument. At the same time, I started an apprenticeship as a librarian, which was pretty far away. It was like 2 hours by train from the place where I lived. And this teacher, she also lives in that town, in that city, in Basel, where I did this apprenticeship. So that was really convenient. So before I started this job, I was going there once a week and she taught me for free. Then I started my apprenticeship, meaning also I had a little income, and then I could also pay her. But then for me, it was, you know, I cannot do this. I don't want to do this. You know, one thing was, you know, of course one can say, okay, an apprenticeship is 3 years, you know, and then I leave. But even that, it was not possible for me. It was really, I was just crying every day, you know, coming back to this hell hole, basically. It was really, really horrible. And then I just canceled the thing. Like after 1 year, 1.5 years, I was like, okay, I cannot do this anymore. I really can't. And then at some point, you know, I mean, it was also physically really demanding for me because I was 14. I was traveling 4 hours by train every day. So basically I had to get up at 5 in the morning, take the train, you know, work the whole day, come back home at 8 at night. And then since I started very late with music and I started very late with instrument, I really had to practice 4 or 5 hours every day. So basically, you know, I come home at 8 at night and from 9 till 1 in the morning, I was just practicing. You know, and that every day with very little sleep for 1.5 years. It was really, yeah. But it paid off in the end. It did pay off, but it was really tough. And of course, also the whole psychological stress of being in this environment that basically really also shapes you yourself in a way that you really don't like. You don't like it about yourself at all. But of course, a lot of these things also realized much later on, you know, like I think I mentioned already twice what a xenophobic environment that was. And, you know, even like being bullied by your own teacher in secondary school, you know, just for not being like everybody else. I mean, it really, it does something to you. You don't really realize it in the moment, but it just keeps on building up and piling up. At some point, you just can't anymore. You just can't. It was going on for years, many, many years. So, yeah. And then at some point, I think I was 18, I applied for a bachelor's degree in Austria, in Vienna. And then I spent my first 2 years of my undergrad there. And but also there it was problematic with my teacher, though, with my main teacher, my viola teacher. And then I decided, okay, you know, because funny enough, it's also funny because the town where my private teacher was when I started to play the instrument, the same town where I did this apprenticeship, is also the town where there is one of the most important conservatories / universities for early music as well, Scuola Cantorum. So then I applied there and I got in. I mean, I didn't apply there from the beginning when I was 18, simply because I didn't have the level. But I got in, so I moved back to Switzerland and I finished my undergrad there. And from there, then I moved away. And since then, I never looked back.
Yeah.
But yeah, but the thing about belonging, you know, it's really something, because at some point I realized also the way, you know, the places where I studied, also the kind of job I do as a freelance musician that involves always a lot of traveling and so on and so on. I did realize at some point that why is there this urge to always travel? Why is there this urge to always go somewhere? And it has for me really been the question of finding a home, basically. You know, I traveled almost all of Europe, some places in the US, the Middle East, South Asia. And in the back of my head, it has always been a thing of, oh yeah, where do I find my belonging? Where do I find my home? And so that is... it's also kind of interesting because, to be honest with you, this question is also changing. It's also changing, especially in the last couple of years. And I think it's really at some point you do realize how everything is connected with each other, you know, how your genes, your upbringing, what you do, where you move, how you move, your whole universe, how it is all connected with each other. Because, for instance, you know, as a viol player, usually you are somebody, you are not, how shall I put this, creative musician in the sense of that you recreate something. But for me, playing this instrument, I was always very attached to improvisation at the beginning. I was very attached to it. But I never really took it seriously. I don't know why. It was something that was around 2 years ago. 2 years ago, that I was asked by this Pakistani artist to make a sound piece for a video installation. I said, yes, sure. And it was the first time actually that I really, you know, it was not just improvisation, but really, yeah, I wouldn't say composing necessarily, but let's say really creating something, not just in the moment, but really something that lasts. In this context, and what I do, I don't really like the word composition, and then I realized, okay, wow, this is really something I need to dig deeper into. If not to find answers, at least to have some sort of an output or a kind of, therapeutic way of dealing with everything that was going on. I mean, of course, I also did psychotherapy, counseling, and so on. But but the interesting thing is what I've realized is that the really important parts, the really important variables that actually never came up, because it's actually very rare that people, no matter how experienced they are, put actually any importance of this whole cultural diversion. Because the problem is very often that people are like, oh yeah, but you grew up in, I heard this so often, you know, that somebody tells me, oh, but you grew up in Switzerland, you know, you are Swiss. I'm like, no, I'm not Swiss. You know,
Yeah.
what does it even mean to be Swiss? What does it mean to be that or this? I never understood. But also I do know people, for them it's very clear, you know, for whatever reason, they are capable of really emerging into a culture from a very young age, and that's the only thing. But also know, not only myself, but also others, that it's really not possible. It's really not possible. But in any case, so creating my own music in that sense, it has really opened up a lot of the question of belonging has actually really changed in that sense that it makes this question more and more redundant.
And
You know,
yeah.
So the thing is, of course, in my work, if you read a little bit of my website, I'm really trying to create something that is completely detached from any kind of, basically the opposite, from any kind of cultural influence and so on and so on. But of course, it's impossible because we're always a product, at least to some extent, we're always a product of our environment, of our history, of something we've come in touch with. But with this mindset, I can really kind of spread out of myself as well, and feel actually much more content with myself. Not necessarily with my environment, but at least with myself and with the question, you know, where do I belong? Because it's. But the issue with this question is also, and I realize, is very often it's the society that puts such a big importance on this question. Always, no matter where I go, no matter where I went in this whole world, you know, it's always like the first or second question. Always, where are you from? You know, and to me, it has really evolved into something. Okay, this person wants to know where I am, so this person can put me into a box, basically. You know, it has a lot to do with prejudice and so on and so on. And like, why? Why is this really necessary? Why do people always need to have this thing to hold on to, which is nothing else than a nationality? You know, I mean, it's, you know, so. And that's also something that I'm really trying to get rid of, also in my music, which is of course very difficult. It's very, very difficult because if you only work on yourself, because as a viol player, you know, I have always been an ensemble musician, you know, always with other people. Now for the first time, I'm really emerged into something that I create completely by myself, where there is absolutely no or almost no interaction with anybody else. And it's really interesting to see in what kind of directions you go. But of course, at the same time, you are in this bubble as well. Right. And so it's really interesting for me. So when I finish a piece, I just send it to a few people, always different people. Very, very different people. Some are musicians, some are artists, some have absolutely nothing to do with the arts at all. And it's always very interesting to have their feedback. You know? And very often I'm like, oh yeah, okay, you know, it's exactly where I was trying to go to, so I'm not so far off. So if there is at least some sort of consent about that. But yeah, but belonging, it has evolved into a very strange and far-fetched concept to me, actually. And as you say, it's a never-ending journey. But you know, for me, this journey has been also very, very painful. So I'm kind of I would say I'm finding peace also by actually transforming the question itself into something that I can actually really work with in the widest sense.
Absolutely. I think that's really powerful work, and something that I can really empathize with, because it's a journey that I feel like I'm
Mm.
also on. What has really illuminated that too is the both freedom and also like total individual expressiveness of improvisation. And
Yeah.
I I wanted to ask you, like, at what point during your musical career did you discover improvisation for yourself? Was it something that was apparent within the tradition, or was it something that was kind of illuminated to you through discovery just on your own instrument?
Yeah, I think there were several factors because so one factor was for sure playing this instrument, a historical Baroque instrument, uh, goes of course hand in hand with ornamentation and historical improvisation. It was a very common practice. But for me, this historical improvisation has always felt like a cage to me, very much like a cage. I had huge issues with it. I mean, already my very first teacher, you know, it was something that she really wanted me to get into as soon as possible. You know, you have a bass line, you have a tenor line, and you have to improvise according to a very strict counterpoint, a very strict style. And for me, this has always been actually very, very, very rough because I felt so, you know, so limited, really in a tiny little cage, which completely prohibited myself to do anything creative at all. Because the issue is also when it comes to the whole pedagogical aspect of teaching historical improvisation in any kind of at least in Europe, conservatory slash university, it is very much focused from the very beginning on this very strictness. You have to be very, very strict, and you're not allowed to make mistakes. You know, and like, okay,
Right.
even if you really want to learn to improvise in a certain style according to very strict rules, that's fine, but you must be allowed to make mistakes, you know, otherwise you don't learn. It's the same thing with learning a language, you know. I cannot learn a language just with a book. I can't. I can only learn, me personally, I can only learn a new language by simply doing it, by speaking it, by making mistakes, a lot of mistakes. And that's how you learn. And with historical improvisation, it's exactly the same thing, I think. So this has had really prohibited me to do anything in this area until I really discovered the so-called free improvisation,
Mm.
which was a very big eye opener to me, very big eye opener. But then also when it comes to free improvisation, you know, also again, Basel, where I studied early music, this town has also very, very strong free improv scene, really very amazing musicians. They even have a master program for free improv. Fred Frith teaches it. If
Mm.
you,
Oh yeah.
he teaches, he's one of the main teachers. And it's a small scene, but it's a very strong scene. So I was also trying to get in there. I played with those people, but there I had again kind of the opposite problem, you know, because they didn't. I was not gladly seen in there because I played sometimes the melody. You know,
Well,
and
yeah.
these people that are really more like, yeah, really more focused on noise. You know, it's very noise based, which is great. I love noise, you know, but I think it's also nice to have a melody from time to time, right? And to really, you know, to improvise a melody and to evolve this melody within the piece you're playing in the moment, you're improvising in the moment, you know, like instant composition, however you want to call it. And yeah, so I was always in between those extremes. On one hand, historical improvisation, which was for me too academic, I couldn't do anything. But in the free improv, again, the other extreme, which was just like, to me, more like, okay, let's do whatever. Although I have to say, I also had some coachings with Fred Frith as well, which was, again, very, very different, because how also he teaches improvisation is really almost like a composer. You know, you improvise, but afterwards you really analyze what you did, and you really have to think about how to evolve a melody and so on and so on. So I think also that was quite. Yeah, it was quite an important phase for me as well.
I'm curious to kind of unpack that idea of what is of the tradition of free improvisation that is from Black roots, which is of the idea of it's almost like the compositional, the embodied compositional process in the moment is of a trust between the ensemble members, and versus the idea of and I don't know the work of Fred Frith more than his name, so I can't speak to his experience. But at the and at the same time, yeah, I'm curious of how your experience kind of illuminates that idea of freedom within like a within like group improvisation, which I'm assuming that's what you were participating in.
Yeah,
Was it like a
yeah.
group, like an ensemble?
It was mostly ensemble or duo, small ensemble. Yeah. In my experience, the most important thing, freedom, yeah, it's more about communication, I think. For me, communication is very, very important, and freedom evolves through that, I think. But it's really important that you really can communicate within a group, that everybody can communicate and really listens. And that's also how a dialogue can actually happen. And within this dialogue, music happens. I think that's really important. And that's something that I think really quite a lot in these free improv sessions that I had back then, where it's, yeah, very often people tend to be very self-centered, and they always kind of have this expectation of the others listening to them and reacting to them. But when everybody does it, then it obviously doesn't work. And but I think this sort of communication is really, really important. But it's something, communication not only in improvised music, in any kind of ensemble playing, communication is very, very important. And I realize though that it's not necessarily very common. I mean, also in early music, or in any kind of music that is written down and you play, in my experience, people think in this hierarchy. Okay, you are the bass line, you take care of the group. I'm the soloist, I do whatever I want to do. It happens very often. But then, if you do find a group, if you listen to an ensemble that really communicates with each other, which is not pure. I mean, of course, hierarchy is important, especially if you're talking about Baroque music, where you have the basso continuo and everything is built. It is important, but when this communication is there, then of course, even in that scenario, one can take freedom. One can take always freedom. One can allow kind of freedom, and it will work because the communication is there. And I think this sort of scenario, you see, it's actually You see very well in improvised music, any kind of improvised music, which is really important. I find very, very important.
I've also observed that idea of the almost the ego getting in the way of the music. Certainly with,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
like
Yeah,
ensemble improvisation, there is kind of a, I know I've observed that too.
yeah,
You
but
know,
yeah, but I think it's really also something has to do with our zeitgeist as well. You know, when music became something that you don't just play in your living room, or you don't just play on the court to entertain your king, or whatever kind of scenario. When it really kind of moved into the concert hall, it's really something that, okay, you know, this sort of ego story kind of developed pretty strongly, and I see this very often, especially nowadays. You know, when I play with some, I mean, I do very little early music since, yeah, it's been a couple of years that I do very, very little of it. And especially there, you know, like, okay, you know, it's not anymore really about the music. It's really more about the person. It's more about the ego. You see this very often with singers, of course. You know, it's always this very like, yeah, I find it very messy where the music seems to be actually rather secondary, and it's more about that you know, people let out their own issues basically.
mm. Do you see within the industry a growing awareness and also acceptance of individual personality within uh, within the music, or is it something that you still feel like you're fighting for?
It's a very good question. I think, yeah, I think especially between new music and early music, because in the early music, it's really, I think there are basically two different fields. You know, you have on one hand, it's all about historical correctness. You know, certain piece in a very historical way. You know, you have to do your research. It's all about the piece and how this piece was performed 300, 400, 500, 600 years ago. It's really just about that. But then on the other hand, you know, if you look at the whole market, the market itself, you do have a few of these superstars in the early music scene. Funny enough, especially in the recorder world.
Hmm.
I shouldn't laugh. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. It's a very serious, very serious.
Hmm.
In the recorder world, but of course, obviously, also with singers and also with some other instruments. And it's really interesting to see that there are, I won't mention any names, that there are some people, they are really being treated like superstars, like pop stars, basically, doing only early music. But if you really listen to them and you see them in on stage, it has really, you're like, okay, what is this? You know, it's all about playing Vivaldi as fast as possible. You know, it's only
Hmm.
about having the fastest fingers. It's of course some trend that you also see in the classical music in general. And but that's, yeah, market. I think market is the right word. It's also something that really sells. You know, it's about you know, the show. You know, selling early music as some mainstream pop concert, basically. So you do have that, and in this case, the question of personality is very important, because these people who do that, they are also very charismatic. It's just only about themselves. It becomes really about themselves, and actually only about themselves. I mean, okay. It would be unfair. It would be unfair to say, okay, all of them are only about themselves. No, of course not. They're there for the music as well. But it becomes part of all of this sort of attribute that does sell this music. And then on the other hand, you have, like the more general early music scene, which is really more about, performing this and that, really historically correct, and having any kind of personality is being looked down upon. And it's kind of funny, and it's also something I always had problems with. Like even when I was studying in Basel, when I was doing my bachelor's, I was actually doing a bachelor's in medieval and Renaissance music. And, it's nice. It's beautiful music and everything. I learned a lot. I learned how to, the whole package. But what I also did realize was that for most of my teachers there at this school, music is more like an academic discipline. It's really more about, how do you say, more an intellectual game. You do research and then you try to recreate something based on your know how it sounded 300-400 years ago. It's more about that than actually the question, why do you actually make music? What's the point of making music?
Right.
And that gets forgotten a lot, I think, in the early music scene in general. I mean, yes, I think on one hand, all the research that has been done, it does open up completely new doors. A very simple example, the violin, the classical violin with its steel strings. If you play a Bach partita, whatever, on such an instrument, it's a completely different story than if you really played on a Baroque violin with the right measurements, the right neck position, the gut strings, the right bow, and so on. It's a completely different world, And I think it's really important that one really discovers that aspect as well. But on the other hand, one should also look at music, what music really is, and also bring some personality as well. I remember very well, I played, I think it was my first year master exam 1 year before I graduated in Amsterdam. I was studying only new music, but in this exam I also played some Abel, simply because I really like Abel. And I remember one of the jury members told me, I didn't like the Abel piece at all, because I didn't hear Abel, I heard only Miron. But for me it was a compliment. For me it was a big compliment.
Yeah.
but it really shows, the sort of spirit that shows to be really like in this little bubble sort of thing and being creative.
I feel like that's really poignant, and also something I kind of want to pivot off of to ask you about how you found electronics within your music, and how did that manner of experimentation kind of find its way into your music, and what has been your process of integration and also disintegration, as the case may be?
That's a good question. So first of all, I think it's important to mention how I got into contemporary music at all, which was, of course, in that sense already back then doing free improv and so on and so on. But then, back then I remember very well, when I asked myself, should I actually, do some research and see if there are actually actual contemporary pieces for the viol, or maybe even commissioning something. That was for me completely out of the question, because I didn't have the feeling. No, it was not just the feeling. I just didn't have the technical abilities. It's as simple as that. Because I mean, it is true. I mean, I know there are a lot of people who don't like to hear that, but if you compare any kind of contemporary, okay, this is also a little bit a very black and white statement, but if you compare classical contemporary music to Baroque music, yes, I mean, technically Baroque music is much easier. It is much easier technically. It really is. So it was always for me like, oh no, it's kind of a word that I don't dare to touch. But then once I moved to Holland, that was still before I actually started my master's in new music. I was studying still early music then. I met this Finnish person, this recorder player, and he was like, "Oh yeah, he just arrived from Helsinki," and he was like, "Oh yeah, you're a gamba player. There's this amazing piece I really want to play with you," and it was this piece by Jukka Tiensu, Veto, out of this cycle Musica Ambigua, which is written for viola da gamba, and or recorder, and or baroque violin, and or harpsichord. But each of these instruments, they have their own part, but you're allowed to combine as you want. But in best case scenario, it's really like a quartet sort of thing, in most of the movements at least. And I looked at the score and I was just like, this is completely insane. I never in my life saw a score like this. Even nowadays, when I show this to even to people who really do a lot of contemporary music, they're like, what's that? It's really it looked completely insane. But then I listened to a recording of it, and it was like, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna try. And just for 3 months, I was just practicing this piece like a mad person, and that's I got into contemporary music. And after that, we did more and more and more and more and more and more. That's kind of how it evolved into. When also I worked in with composers who really also took advantage of the ability to improvise as well. So then kind of things were coming together, and in that sense, I started to work also with composers using electronics as well in their own work. And that was really a point where I was, oh wow, of course, contemporary music, it's fine, it's great. But with electronics, it really opens up a completely new world to you. Because the possibilities are endless. They're literally endless. And yeah, so I really enjoyed simply playing the pieces of electronics of other composers and so on, and kind of that was what was going on until I moved to Paris. And in Paris, I met a very, very amazing composer and electronic musician, Dionysos Papanikolaou, who uses mostly nowadays analog synthesizers. So analog synthesizers, plus he can do anything in Max MSP. He also teaches Max MSP at the one of the universities in Paris as well. So we started a collaboration together, which was in the beginning, it was all based on improvisation. And through these improvised pieces, we actually created actual pieces. Especially electronics part became more and more fixed with a lot of flexibility, of course. And also my part became more and more fixed. But in this whole process, I also realized, wow, what is actually possible with electronics in general. And that was also quite an eye-opener. But then, yeah, so I decided, okay, that's really something I should get more into. Also, when I started 2 years ago, this piece for this artist in Pakistan, that was the first time that I really had to use a DAW, a DAW. I always thought, oh yes, I want to learn actually Super Collider, which is based only on code, and it just took me too long to even get to even do something very simple. It just took me too long because I don't have any background in programming. And I was like, okay, now, so I decided to use Ableton Live. And with that, it went really, really quickly, actually, to a point where I can say, oh yeah, I mean, of course, I still have a lot to learn. There's always a lot to learn, especially in this realm of electronic music. There's always so much. But it has really given me also this sort of peace of mind to be able to make my own audio design, you know, and to really create something new with the tools that I have as an expansion of myself.
From the pieces that I listened to, the most recent one, Waves, that I was particularly compelled by, all of them are really fascinating. And I think what I feel tied everything together was this idea of, so as an improviser and as improvisers, and I feel like in general within the world, the traditions of improvisation is the idea of temporality and how that almost the passage of time creates form in a sense.
Yeah.
And what I really appreciated was, first of all, the interplay between electronics and the acoustic music,
Yeah.
and the idea of both obscuring and also kind of obscuring the timbre and also kind of integrating timbre. And I guess my question is the idea of, within your work, has would you say that electronics has almost helped break and kind of open up the idea of form in terms of temporality? I mean, certainly within, I guess I'm relating from Hindustani music, where the entire form is not something that is quote unquote even like binary or ternary or these kind of European styles of form or European conceptions of what form is within music. So yeah, I guess yeah, I guess it's more of a comment and a question regarding just the integration of electronics in your music and music that you've participated in, and how that has maybe shaped your idea or reshaped the idea of form for you within music.
Yeah, form in music. Well, okay, I'm not sure that that's the right answer, but I think if I think a little bit more back, I think one of the reasons also why I started to work in this way with electronics, also on my own, and really create something out of nothing, which of course also goes hand in hand with form, any kind of form, was I think also the idea of seeing myself more to work as like a visual artist, actually, and just like as a musician, because I like the idea, you know, because as a musician, especially as a performing musician, it's always a thing of, oh yeah, you know, you go on stage, you play your piece, the piece has a beginning, middle, and end, and then it's gone. You
Right.
know, it's gone. It only exists in a very specific moment. And I have the feeling with that kind of work I'm doing now, the piece, of course, I mean, okay, now it's recorded. At this point, it's recorded. And you can press play, you have the same thing, you know, bring till the end. But I have the feeling that also the way how I make these pieces is also that there could be something already before, you know, there could be something more even after. We just don't hear it, it just exists, it's just there, you know. And the moment when you press play, you know, you get a glimpse of it. To make it more clear, also both pieces that I sent you, they're also done in a way that I can also perform them live. But of course, the part, especially of where the viol is more prominent, it's very based on improvisation. Of course, I use certain motives and so on and so on. But still, when it's live, it's different every time.
Yeah.
And it also influences the form very much so, you know, so you can see it maybe as a, I don't know, as a living painting, I don't know. But it's something that simply exists, for me at least. And not just, you know, I mean, also improvised music itself, you know, if we talk about really purely improvised music, especially free improvised music, you know, it's also, it lives only in the moment and then it's gone forever. You know, it doesn't come back, you know. But in this case, you know, it can come back many times. It changes slightly because it's always there, and it can always go through a certain evolution depending on the time, the environment, and so on and so on.
Was the idea of the name Waves, was that to was that like something structural, or was that inspired by because so the way I was hearing it was the idea of these overlapping waves of
Yeah.
of like timbre origin, whereas like in the origin would be
Mm.
of the viol, and then the other would be of this electronic patch. And
Yeah.
one, and then the other, what you said earlier about the idea of visual art, I've often heard, and the idea of like mosaic or tapestry has often come up in conversations that I've had with other people who are of
Mm.
multiple identities or embodying many things at once. In many sense, that is a very,
Mm.
at least in my opinion, a very human experience. That it's
Yeah.
almost like, certainly within my life, I've almost inadvertently become this ambassador, as like a person of color
Mm.
in a mostly like white town. It's like it was
Mm.
this
Yeah.
identity
Yeah.
that was thrust upon me to be like, well, you should be there to almost help us open up our own multiplicity of identities,
Okay.
as almost like this. I mean, certainly within my kind of self-assumed role of explaining what Hindustani music is to people who have
Yeah.
always, questioned me. It's like, oh, where are you from? And typically the next question is, if they know I'm a musician. It's like it. I've always taken it upon myself for so long to explain, and so I find it really inspiring and courageous to hear from you that you're approaching this idea um, of multiplicity as almost something that's embodied rather than something that needs to be explained all the time. And I feel like that's certainly something that I've heard within your music, that the music kind of embodies that quality. Um, so rather than something where you're lecturing through the music, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's definitely an aspect of it, that's for sure. But I also hope that everybody who listens to it also projects or perceives something which is also personal to them as well. You know, it's not about, it shouldn't be only, I mean, of course it is in one way, you know, it is very personal. It is very personal. But I hope that it also can become personal to the listener as well, kind of touch some of their own experiences. I hope. I hope. I mean, of course, we are very different,
Yeah.
but that's an aim. It's an aim as well. You know, I'm not really. It's also not me to be only like, you know, in the role of lecturing. Okay, this is like this or that.
Yeah.
Not only. It's really also something that the listener can also discover something for themselves as well. I hope. And that's also something that I'm gonna try. I think I mentioned already before that I'm gonna do this solo residency in Johannesburg next year. So this is really my goal. So basically, I'm gonna spend 3 months there. It goes via, I applied for this via Pro Helvetia, it's the Swiss Arts Council. So my idea is to create a sound installation where I really hope that not only, you know, by listening, but also by the entire environment, you can really emerge into this experience, not only by, you know, my own personal experience, which is of course the base of it, but also to discover something more about yourself and ask yourself also the question of belonging, of where do you belong, you know? Because for most people that are, you know, that grow up in a very traditional way, they never ask themselves this question, right? But I think even then, you know, if you would ask yourself this question, it might even then open up some other doors to wherever they might lead to. It's also, again, very, very personal. But I think it's really important to ask yourself questions from time to time and see where it leads to. And this way you can really grow as a person as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I will try to do. I also think that that Johannesburg is a pretty good place for this sort of research as well, because of its whole colonial history, because of this whole history of apartheid and so on and so on. It is still a huge melting pot of different cultures and religions. So I thought, yeah, let's see, you know, at least I will really have 3 months where I can really focus only on that work. Really have the right space in my head, because it's also really difficult, I realize, to do that kind of work. I mean, I can't just, you know, just sit down and be like, oh yeah, and I'm going to make a new piece, huh? And 2 hours later, oh, it's a new piece, here we go. It's really very, you know, you really need to have the right mindset for this as well. And so these 2 pieces I sent here, I was really lucky to be actually able to do them. I just moved to Brussels, I'm now here. And, you know, everything, it's a very loud neighborhood. There's a lot of noise. There's always something going on, which can be inspiring, but most of the time it's just annoying. Life itself, you know, which just doesn't really give you the right space, you know. It's not about having time or not having time, because if you want to do something, you can always create time. It's really more about the mental space. So I really think this will also benefit this residency, my whole work, and let's see where it goes from there.
I'm curious to know how the pandemic is affecting your approach to music and to your career, and the idea of residency has almost turned into something that is virtual. And so for you to be somewhere physical, it feels very gratifying to know that opportunity is still open for you. It's gratifying to me to know that opportunity is open for you still.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, yeah, the pandemic and its impact. Yeah, I mean, it has been pretty harsh. I mean, first of all, especially for me, it was. I mean, not only for me, it was for everybody. I think it was also very, very confusing, very strange. You know, all of a sudden, you know, you do your thing, you know, this and that, you know, you're building up a career or you have, and all of a sudden everything is gone. and you just don't know where it is going to. You don't know how things will evolve. And also for me, most of my work got cancelled, meaning performances, most of them were just gone. Luckily, not all of them. I mean, I know that I'm one of the few lucky ones that didn't get cancelled everything. I still have a project running in France. It's a transdisciplinary production. This is still there. That's the only project actually. But of course, yeah, it made me think a lot about, well, first of all, about myself. What do I really want to do now, and what are the opportunities actually that are being given or not being given. I think the most difficult part in this period is not actually not having any work or not having any performances. I think the worst part of it is simply not to know what is going to happen.
Yeah.
Right now, I mean, I can talk mainly about Europe. Because even within Europe, it's a tiny continent, but every country has its very own policies. So there, I think the EU has completely, completely failed in that sense, because every country does whatever. There's still countries now, again, simply shutting themselves off completely, just closing down, complete lockdowns, again, here and there, and blah, and then something opens up again, then from one day to the other, they make a decision, and we cannot travel from A to B anymore, but you can still travel from A to C and from C to B. It's complete nonsense what is going on there. But also when it comes and it translates exactly also on the whole situation about culture in general, because it's not only about performances itself and how they're being done, it's also simply a financial matter as well. If you look at certain countries, especially nowadays, generally speaking in Europe, the political climate is shifting more and more towards the right, which means less and less money for culture is available. This happens in most of the countries here. And now with COVID, there's a lot of governments that saw it as a very welcome excuse as well to invest into culture even less. I mean, of course, I understand there is maybe, at least to some extent, some more urgent things at the moment. Yes, but I'm 100% sure it's going to stay like that. It won't be only, oh yes, now COVID means no money for culture, but don't worry, next year it will come back. No, it's not going to be like this, except something will happen with a very, very deep implication, whatever that might be. But how it is running right now, I don't see it in a very positive way, actually, not at all. Some countries, of course, I mean, like France, they're actually really trying. France is one of the only few countries that really tries, even after the whole crisis, to really invest even more into culture, to really make it possible to keep it afloat, at least to some extent. Yeah. There are other countries like the Netherlands that they cut again, like the whole subsidies by half or even more, even to companies that, like especially dance companies and theater companies, have been existing already for decades, really important companies, and they're just gone now, and then it's really a mess, so you really don't know what is going to happen. And of course, for me, it's like, okay, but what shall I do? Should I really try to really focus more on a career as a performing artist? But the thing is also, with the work I'm doing with my electronics, it's also something that doesn't have to be performed live, right? It can be something that can happen in any kind of format, actually. It can be live, but it can be also an installation. It can be also an exhibition. But who knows? It could be also used in film, in movies, or I don't know what. There are a lot of possibilities, and I think that's also something, to be honest, that I'm kind of looking more into now, knowing that performing will be really difficult. I mean, and yeah, because you don't know. But I'm also not somebody, during this whole pandemic, I was really locked up. I was in Pakistan for 3 months. I wasn't there. Yeah, I just couldn't leave the country. It was completely locked down. And so I spent a lot of time on Facebook, right? It was actually the time period where for the first time I actually really started commenting on stuff or even liking things, on Facebook. I was really a lot on this bloody Facebook. And in a way, it really got to me to see so many colleagues of mine, just posting one video after the other, playing this, playing that, and from the living room. And I'm like, okay, you really, I think I understand why these people are doing that. And I do it also from time to time. I do something like this myself. But I think you really have to kind of be able to draw the line and really decide for yourself, okay, what am I doing actually? Especially if you are a full-time professional musician without work, especially, I mean, there were so many colleagues of mine, just putting their work for free online who always complain about getting paid too little or not getting paid at all, for projects. I mean, it's also a very, very common issue here. And then they just give the art away for free, just like that, just into the void. Yeah. And it's like, I mean, of course, it's a personal choice, but I think it's really important to be aware of it, to really, understand what one is actually doing in such a situation. Because yeah, especially in classical music, but especially in early music, I've seen, already in the last few years, it's been going on for years, not only now. It has been an issue that you have, as an example, these very, very famous Baroque orchestras, who are looking for new talents, and they're trying to sell it as an academy, but in reality, it's not an academy, but you're just playing for free, So It's like this whole thing, oh, you're going to work with this very famous orchestra, tour for 2-3 months, but you don't get paid. But oh yeah, but it's exposure. You can write it in your CV that you played with these and these people. Okay, great, fantastic. More and more now, and it's like, okay, but where is this going to? Also I was involved in some opera festival in Amsterdam a few years back, and I really wanted to do it because it was a contemporary opera that a colleague of mine composed, and I really liked the music. But then at some point I realized, okay, what is this actually? It's a festival. They have millions and millions of euros, but we didn't get paid at all. They didn't pay us, Oh, of course they had a budget for the whole scenery and so on and so on. But, like we were like sitting and standing these like pots with dirt, I don't know what, And of course, this dirt, they didn't get it for free, right? They had to pay for this dirt. They had to pay for this whole equipment. But the musicians didn't get paid, These sort of things, especially in the Netherlands, have become very, very common, more and more common. And now, with this crisis, what I see at least, maybe it's only my perception, I don't know, but my impression is this is becoming now only worse and worse. Even in places where you still can perform, at least to some extent, you have less money, so they simply try to screw, especially young musicians, just, oh yeah, play with us, it's exposure, it's for free, but it's you can put it in your CV, but you don't get paid, and it's just exploitation. It's pure exploitation.
Hoping I'm able to see you in person soon, Miron. Thank you so much for speaking.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this. And yeah. Anyway, let's talk soon. I'm curious. I thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you. See you soon.
Yes, see you soon. Okay. Take care, Miron.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao. Take care.